This gospel lesson is one among many in the Bible concerning peace and forgiveness, anxiety and aggression. And Christians are a people of the book, following a religion of redemption, of new beginnings, and the entire story of God and humanity is one of God rebuilding our relationships after we have gone and mucked them up again and again and again. And in this season of Easter Sundays, it's funny to me that the reading would come from a section of Jesus' goodbye address, something that Jesus said to the disciples on the night of the Last Supper. And that's why the imagery this Sunday and the last are of gardens and vines, reminiscent of the surroundings of Jesus, his final night in the Garden of Gethsemane, with little more than pinpricks of light to illuminate the paths of the would-be disciples on the most harrowing and painful occasion of their wanderings after their rabbi. I wonder why. The people planned the readings for this season and chose this passage rather than something that more readily lends itself to a mission statement or an inaugural address. These words are some of Jesus' last before his wrongful arrest and police brutality, unlawful detention, and state execution. For the early church, there must have been a bittersweet memory for the disciples when they recalled and shared aloud Jesus' sayings of peace and forgiveness, Christ's warnings against anxiety and aggression and violence. And because this promise is shared in Scripture, Jesus' gift of peace is not just conveyed to the first disciples, the first followers, the ones who betrayed him, denied him, and misconstrued his every teaching to the end. That peace isn't just for them. Those words, "My peace I give to you," are powerful enough to continue to hold sway over the church from one generation to the next, even as we grow further and further removed from the revelation of God in Jesus, that direct and personal encounter with a man who walked on dusty roads in Nazareth. Even we, far removed, who have seen but have yet believed, who have not yet seen, even we are promised something otherworldly, which isn't given to us as the world gives things. Something otherworldly from the one who is not of this world. Those words, "My peace I give to you. My peace I leave with you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not let them be afraid." There are other passages in John which speak to me. Earlier during the supper, for example, Jesus bends down and washes the disciples' feet, saying, "If I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought also to wash one another's feet, for I have set you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." Jesus isn't just an inspiration for us to feel good about. He's an example to follow. And it says much else to that effect, that we ought to bear with one another and share with each other's lives. And will we ever listen to those words of Christ and allow ourselves to live according to God's way of love? It's a challenge, and we shrink from it. At least most of the time. There are instances where the church listens, though. The early church regularly and often met together, sharing things in common, having meals together. They worshiped God in community, not on their own, not in their own living rooms by themselves, sitting and watching a televangelist, or grumbling about the people in the pews and the pulpit and the people they just can't stand. They worshiped God in community. And they sought to serve one another, learning as they went. Paul struck out time and again for some days in the city of Philippi. No one asked him to stay with them. He left the city of Philippi, went outside its city walls, didn't talk to any men, talked to women. This after having a vision of a woman in Macedonia? No, a man in Macedonia. That's what he envisioned finding. And instead, what he finds is a host, a dealer in purple cloth, with her own household, her own team, who is able to further the mission and build a church. And we read of Paul's letter to that church in our New Testament throughout the year. Sometimes you have to be open to something new, to building a relationship with someone new that you had not envisioned. Last week we heard how Peter had reached out to Gentiles. This week we hear how Paul accepts the leadership of women, despite everything in him resisting. Lydia prevails upon them and insists that God is bigger than he thinks God is. We're always learning, even today. We experience the same set of heartaches as we go about our daily lives. Whether it's fatigue or frustration, pain, grief or shame, anxiety or guilt, we have to agree that our lives are far from perfect. There are many times throughout a day when I wish that when Jesus said, "Come to me, you who are weary, who are carrying heavy burdens, I will give you rest," that what he meant was that I would find physical rest that day, not the spiritual rest for our souls that he seems to have promised. There are many times when, remembering that he says, "Do not worry about your life, what you will eat, what you will drink," I wish he meant that he would take care of getting groceries. I just wish that life would be different, not that I would be different in my life. Maybe I could just be taught to worry a little bit less about mundane things, things that don't matter when it comes down to it, things that are just inconveniences. That really would be nice, just to change. And I think we all would be happy to be a little bit more detached and unbothered by people who throw accusations or cast aspersions around. I would like it if everyone were able to see each and every person as a child who needs to be patiently loved, rather than as some arrogant or combative adult who is fully accountable for her actions. I would love it if we could do both, holding people accountable for one part, and seeing their heart and having empathy, seeing why they are just as they are for the other part. I would like to be able to see in each person I meet the wounds they carry from the bumps and scrapes of this world, as well as the kind of potential that God sees in each of us. Wouldn't that be something? Wouldn't we be more like Paul meeting Lydia? Wouldn't we be more like Peter meeting the Gentiles? But you, when you are on your own, do you find that you're ever easily aggravated or set off, flying off the handle, yelling and screaming, perhaps even calling someone the devil in your mind, all while you are asked to take a look at yourself in the mirror? Have you ever felt like you were protecting some aspect of your identity just in your reaction to someone? Maybe you have had a time in your life when you were quick to circle the wagons and to shun strangers, and ignore sources of wisdom, even if it meant missing the presence of Christ among you, Christ revealed in a newcomer, Christ revealed in someone you perceived as an enemy, as unwelcome, as foreign, as rejectable and expendable. What cause for fearfulness makes us so defensive and so inhospitable? I don't know. Why do we put up our defenses and our walls? The other week at annual conference, I got to share a table with a colleague who is the pastor at Trinity United Methodist Church in Frederick. And sitting in her company reminded me of a story of hers about one of her classes in seminary. The class was held at the women's prison in Clinton, New Jersey, with half of the students composed of women from the seminary. The other half was made up of women in the prison. And they called themselves outsiders and insiders. And it was a very powerful experience for her. And she reflected that the women in the class walked alongside her on the road throughout the semester and showed her great hospitality, even though she was white, college-educated, middle class, from a very loving family, with a loving partner. She even has a mom who's a pastor. Goodness. Many of the people who were insiders were not the same as her. And they didn't talk about why many of the women were in prison, because that is intrusive. But some women were open about it. And her own classmate sat next to someone in class who had killed her abusive boyfriend when he finally threatened her son's life. And she went into prison when her son was 4. And by that point, her son had grown to be an adult. And this was the same woman who always had a big smile for my friend when they came together in the class. The women in the class, insiders and outsiders, opened each other's eyes to seeing God in new places. Like within the khaki uniforms of incarcerated women. And driving back from Clinton after class each week, the outside students may just have said to one another, "Weren't our hearts burning inside us as this one talked to us on the road and explained the scriptures to us?" I'm sure you've had experiences like this. They lead to a new perspective on what people are going through. But maybe at times you feel more like you could be surrounded by strangers for some reason, and your eyes would still be kept from recognizing God in them. And that is understandable, because many of us have been on our own for so long that we have had little company or involvement with others. We've been swimming in our own anxiety about our own health, the health of loved ones. Perhaps we're even having trouble sleeping or sleeping too much, or the same goes for eating and drinking. It's hard enough to concentrate on our responsibilities to maintain a cheerful attitude with people who stop by. People are sinking into lower and lower sentiments about the economy, falling into deeper bouts of depression, obsessive tendencies, other mental health conditions exacerbated by a continued disruption of social norms, shocks to our finances, threats to our employment, the loss of our friends' and families' livelihoods. We're facing stubborn inflation. It's not going to go down. We're facing tyranny against Ukraine, genocide through starvation in Palestine, anti-Semitism and abhorrent murder in Washington, D.C., outside of a museum, xenophobia with the expulsion of students from abroad. That's the world we're walking in. And some of us are no longer watching anymore. We're just drowning in an increased reliance on ways to avoid or numb feelings of powerlessness, ways which only make our other problems harder, not easier to face. Where does anyone find peace? It isn't hiding from us. My peace I give to you, he declares, before they need it. I pray we stop forgetting the peace of God, which meets us right where we are before we arrive there. It is a promise that's so clearly conveyed in the passage about the disciples on their way to linger in the dark of the garden on the eve of their teacher's murder. Peace is given to them, even them so freely offered to you and me as well. And we don't always see it. The disciples don't. Not even a day after its offer, Peter draws a sword to fight the police. Not one of the disciples give a moment's thought to reaching out to Judas, to keep him from taking his life in shame and guilt, isolation and regret. Not one of them. How many weeks and months will it take for the disciples to receive Christ's spirit of peace in their hearts? Just an inkling of it. They don't embrace the peace. They don't embrace God's gift for their lives, not in the crisis. It's hard to change your habits in a crisis. You revert to what you learned in your first painful moments before you could speak. When your mom left the room to go get coffee and she disappeared from your world forever until she returned 1 minute later, smiling at you. In that moment when she's gone, you're in a crisis. And we learn time and again to worry, to hold on to what we think will keep us safe and secure, or to deaden our feelings and to avoid even hoping for goodness to come. Say, well, it was bound to happen. The world is just nothing you can rely on or count on. The world is an unsafe place. That's the stance that we have. It leads to people drawing swords. It leads to people questioning why Peter is reaching out to Gentiles. Why them, the outsiders? Why them? It leads to people asking Paul, why are you talking to Lydia? What's wrong with you? Why can't you talk to the man of Macedonia that you had a vision of? Where is that guy? What did you say to that guy that kept him from accepting you? What's wrong with you, Paul? Why is Lydia a leader now? We have a fearfulness of seeing the world as a safe place where we can love and be loved. In a crisis, we can't remember Jesus' words, "My peace I give to you." What terrible trauma it must have been for the disciples to keep them from remembering. It happens to all of us when we're overwhelmed by our circumstances. It doesn't have to be terrible. It can be a baby not knowing about coffee and how important that is. But it's still too much for the infant. We feel our life is endangered and our sanity is threatened. And we develop patterns of fear, anger, shame, helplessness, vulnerability. Those are a few of our more common responses to traumatic events. When we're reminded that we're not as powerful and capable, as invincible as we thought we were. And when faced with reality, the awareness that we're small, fragile, easily tossed about by the waves, We can respond to that realization by dwelling in our disappointment, lingering in self-pity and self-absorption, until we become bitter, always hurting, never healed, prone to lashing out at others who remind us of our wounds, rarely gracious or compassionate, often deflecting, rarely accepting responsibility. Instead of transforming disappointment, grief, and fear, we can brood on it and nurture it, so that we will be, in our estimation, stronger and more vigilant, but really, we're just more callous and guarded and suspicious. We do not accept God's peace because it involves admitting and feeling our weakness. And while the disciples eventually walked away from Jerusalem, that site of their trauma, Jesus' promise eventually went with them. Even as they rejected God's gift of peace, even as they lived in the night of their own emotional turmoil, God's goodness and mercy followed after them. God's peace, given to the disciples, when it was finally received and accepted, finally admitted into their hearts, allowed them to begin to reframe their worldview, their understanding of God and of sacrifice and what divine power and might really means. Not smashing one's enemies who get in the way, but denying oneself for the sake of the other, even the Gentile, even women, even the enemy, Jesus taught, even the ungrateful and unkind. Jesus' peace transforms trauma into fresh understanding, rejuvenated purpose, and an entirely new life, unlike what you see in the world. What would happen if you and I could learn to accept God's peace more completely, even on difficult days and in a crisis? What would happen if our hearts were forever welcoming of Jesus' call to disarmament and beating swords into plowshares? How would God's peace transform our trauma? That is worth exploring. One way that we could begin to allow God's peace to wash over us is simply by writing down the details of a day, taking a notepad or a journal or an app on your phone if you find that you're always on your phone. And you can write throughout the day what's happened, and it might seem mundane, but it's easier to write periodically. One sentence about the past hour than to write a page at the day's end. And after you spend several days in a week writing, you can look for patterns. Did you seem happier when you were contemplating a family member, or talking to a loved one on the phone, or contributing to a worthy cause, or feeling the sun on your face? And you might discover a new appreciation for life. You might reevaluate your priorities, how you spend your time. You might realize that you do want to cut back your hours with one task to devote more time to a different one. You might want to cultivate a new hobby even now, something that you put off until retirement, but still fearfully never took up when you had the chance. A new passion. Something you're discovering you not only have time for, but interest in. All as you look at what you're doing with your life, not through the lens of panic and urgency, spinning from one crisis to another, but from a position of peace and acceptance that comes from God's Spirit dwelling within you. That spirit of peace might empower you to learn to be able to sit with yourself in your discomfort, and to sit with others in their grief and worry. And you might understand your own need for help and company more readily, more clearly, being able to accept it more freely, because you also are incomplete without the care of others and of God watching over you. When Jesus says, "My peace I give to you," it's not the kind of peace that arises from sitting on a porch for a morning, sipping tea, watching pelicans dive into the water for their breakfast. It's not the kind of peace that comes from an hour of meditation surrounded by candles and crosses and potted flowers. The peace of Christ, the union with God, is the utter absence of being at war with God, at war with the world, seeing the world as a frightening place. It is the release from being pursued by a vengeful and vindictive God, the freedom from being convinced and convicted of impending doom. Instead, the peace that Jesus offers is the affirmation that Christ is in the Father, and Christ is in us, and the Father is no longer far from us, but is within us. And I cannot imagine any greater wholeness, any deeper completeness than being one with your Creator. I would love to have this kind of assurance every hour of every day. It keeps slipping from me. But we don't have to wait for it. We already have been brought into Christ's peace. We already are incorporated into God's love. And we get to witness all things being made whole, even the things inside of ourselves, the things that we think are irreparable. We have no reason to be afraid. We never did. No reason to let our hearts be troubled, because we belong to God. We all do. And Christ's peace is ours to keep, because he does not give to us as the world gives. He does not need it back. Will you let Christ's peace transform you in your life, your daily life, and to change everything into something new? I pray you will. Amen. I'm sorry for preaching so long at you. Let us sing together our hymn of response, Be Still My Soul, found on page 534. Please rise as you're able.